Hello everyone. This video is very helpful for the grade 11 students. Under the electrochemistry, we are going to discuss about the electrolysis. Electrolysis means the technique of obtaining chemical changes or the chemical reactions in a solution or liquid which conduct the electricity by passing the electric current. This experiment is to find out the liquid or solution which conduct the electricity. So in here you can see there are two carbon electrodes connected through the wire with the electric source as well as the ammeter. And these carbon electrodes are dipped in the liquid solution which are used, and see whether there is a deflection in ammeter or not. So the deflection of ammeter could be observed in the acidified water as well as the salt solutions. So they can conduct the electricity. But the deflection of ammeter could not be observed in the kerosene and coconut oil, ethanol, distilled water. So they do not conduct the electricity. Electrolytes means the liquid or solution which conduct the electricity. So there are some examples for the electrolytes. First one is the aqueous solution of the ionic compounds. The ionic compounds, when we are dissolve the ionic compounds in the water, we can get these aqueous solution of the ionic compounds. For example, sodium chloride in an aqueous state. So it consists sodium ion, chloride ions, from the sodium chloride as well as the hydrogen ion and hydroxide ions from the water. Likewise, in the copper sulfate, copper ions, sulfate ions, from the copper sulfate and the hydrogen ions and the hydroxide ions from the water. And second one is molten liquid of ionic compounds. So when we hit these ionic compounds, we can get the molten liquid of these ionic compounds. For example, sodium chloride in a liquid state, which consists sodium ions and chloride ions. And the third one is solution of acids, the diluted chloric acids and diluted sulfuric acids. These diluted chloric acid consist hydrogen ions, chloride ions, from the chloric acids as well as the hydrogen ions and hydroxide ions from the water, because this one is diluted. Likewise, in the sulfuric acid too, which consists hydrogen ions, sulfate ions from the sulfuric acid as well as the hydrogen ions and hydroxide ion from the water. Next one is solution of bases, the diluted sodium hydroxide, which consists sodium ions, hydroxide ions from the sodium hydroxide, as well as the hydrogen ions and hydroxide ions from the water. Non-electrolytes mean the liquid or solution which do not conduct the electricity. So there are some examples: pure water and these hydrocarbon compound like petrol, kerosene, paraffin, hexane with the covalent bonds, so they do not conduct the electricity because they haven't any movable ions. The electrolytic cell, which mean the apparatus set up to conduct the electricity through an electrolyte. It consists of three components. First one is electric current or electric source, and the second one is electrodes. There are two electrodes, and the third one is electrolyte, which mean the liquid or solution which conduct the electricity. So now we are discuss about the conventions adopted in electrolysis. The first convention is the electrode, which is connected to the positive terminal of the battery, is known as the positive electrode, and the electrode which is connected to the negative terminal of the battery is known as the negative electrode. Second convention, as you know, the opposite ions or opposite charges are attracted each together. So positive ions in this solution are migrated toward or attracted towards the negative electrodes which have the negative charge. Likewise, the negative ions in the solution or liquid are migrated toward the positive electrode. Third convention, the positive ions are migrated towards the negative electrode and receive electrons, and they undergo the reduction. So if there are more than two ions in the solution or liquids, more than two positive ions in the liquid, the ion which is situated below in the activity series, that ion get reduced first. For example, when we are taking the hydrogen ions and the copper ion, the copper is situated below the hydrogen, so the copper get reduced first. Fourth convention, the positive ions in the solution or liquid migrated towards the negative electrodes and receive electrons, and they get reduced or undergo the reductions. So these reductions happen or occurs at the negative electrodes. This negative electrode is the cathode. The fifth convention, the negative ions in the solutions or the liquids which are migrated towards the positive electrodes, and lose electrons and they undergo the oxidation. If there are more than two negative ions in this solution, which ion oxidizes first is decided by these several factors. Sixth convention, the negative ions in these solutions are attracted towards the positive electrodes and they losing the electrons and they get oxidized. So this oxidation occurs at the positive electrodes. So this positive electrode is anode. So the oxidation happens in the anode. So oxidation, the first letter is O, and which occurs at the anode. First letter is A. So OA are the vowels. So you can easily memorize it. The oxidation occurs at the anode. Seventh convention, if a metal except platinum is used as anode, it will get oxidized instead the oxidation of the chloride ion or the negative ions. Now we are going to discuss about the electrolysis of fused sodium chloride by using the carbon electrodes. You can see this picture, the fused sodium chloride is used as an electrolyte, so it consists the sodium ions as well as the chloride ions only. And then the electrode which is connected to the positive terminal of the battery is known as the positive electrode, and the electrode which is connected to the negative terminal of the battery is known as the negative electrode. In fused sodium chloride, there are sodium ion as well as the chloride ions. So the reactions happening at the positive electrodes, the chloride ions are the negative ions. So these ions are migrated towards the positive electrode and they losing the electrons and undergo the oxidation. So this one is the first half reaction. And second one is the reactions occurring at the negative electrodes. The positive ion is a sodium ion. So these sodium ions are attracted towards the negative electrodes and they receive electrons and they get reduced and become as a sodium atom. So this one is the second half ionic reactions. So by adding these first and second half ionic reactions, you can get the full ionic reactions. But before that, you have to check the electron number. In the first reactions, there are 2 electrons, and the second reactions, there is an electron. So not equal. So you have to equalize these electron number. So you have to multiply these second reactions by 2 and you can get the third half ionic reactions. So by adding these first and third reactions, you can get the whole ionic reactions and simplify it by cutting these electron number. This will happen in the This is happening in the down cell to extract the sodium. Let's see about the electrolysis of aqueous sodium chloride. So which consists the sodium ion, chloride ion, as well as the hydrogen ions and the hydroxide ions from the water. So in here this electrode which is connected to the positive terminal of the battery is known as the positive electrodes, which mean the anode. And the electrode which is connected to the negative terminal of the battery is known as the negative electrode, which is cathode. So in sodium chloride in aqueous state, which consists sodium ions, chloride ions, hydroxide ions, and hydrogen ions, but reactions happening in the negative electrodes. So there are two positive ions, hydrogen ions, and the sodium ions. So the hydrogen ion is situated below the sodium ion in the activity series. So these hydrogen ions get reduced first. So you can see these hydrogen ions are receiving the electrons, receive the electrons, and they become as the hydrogen gas. This one is the first half ionic reaction. And this next reactions happening at the positive electrodes. There are two negative electrons, chloride ions and the hydrogen ions, hydroxide ions. So the chloride ions has the higher tendency to get oxidized. So these chloride ions are losing the electrons and become as a chlorine gas. This one is the second half reactions. So by adding these two reactions, we can get the full reaction. So before that, you have to check the electron number 2, 2. So no need to worry about the electron number. You just adding the first and second reactions and we can get the whole ionic reactions. In here, the hydrogen ions become as a hydrogen gas, likewise the chlorine ions become as a chlorine gas. So the sodium plus and the OH minus hydroxide ions are in the solution now. So these form sodium hydroxide. So this experiment is used to produce the sodium hydroxide. So next, electrolysis of aqueous copper sulfate. So in this copper sulfate in aqueous state, so it consists copper ions and sulfate ions, hydrogen ions, and the hydroxide ions. And these electrode which is connected to the positive terminal of the battery is known as the anode or positive electrode, as well as the electrode which is connected to the negative terminal of the battery is known as the negative electrode or cathode. Reactions happening at the negative electrodes, there are two positive ions, copper ions and hydrogen ions, but copper is situated below the hydrogen, so the copper is get reduced first. And these copper ions are receiving two electrons and become as a copper atom. And next, reactions happening at the positive electrodes, there are two negative ions, hydroxide ions as well as the sulfate ions. The rather sulfate ions, hydroxide ions have the higher tendency to get oxidized. So these hydroxide ions are losing 4 electrons and get oxidized. So by adding these first and second reactions, we can get the whole ionic reactions. But before that, we have to check the electron number. So there are 2 electrons in the first reactions and 4 electrons in the second reactions. So we have to multiply the first reactions by 2 and we can get the third reactions. So by adding the second and third reactions, we can get the full ionic reactions. Next, electrolysis of acidulated water. So in acidulated water, let's take the diluted sulfuric acid. So in the diluted sulfuric acid consist hydrogen ions, hydroxide ions, as well as the sulfate ions in the solution. And this electrode which is connected to the positive terminal of the battery is known as the anode or positive electrodes, as well as the electrode which is connected to the negative terminal of the battery is known as the negative terminal, negative electrode or the cathode. Reactions happening at the negative electrodes. So in the solutions, the positive ions are the hydrogen ions. So these hydrogen ions are receiving the electrons and they get reduced and become as a hydrogen gas. This one is the first half reaction. And the reactions happening at the positive electrodes, there are two negative ions, hydroxide ion as well as the sulfate ions. So these hydroxide ions have the higher tendency to get oxidized first. So these hydroxide ions are losing the electrons and become as water and oxygen. So this one is the second half reactions. By adding these first and second reactions, we can get the whole ionic reactions. But before that, we have to check the electron number. There are 2 electrons in the first reactions and 4 electrons in the second reactions. So we have to multiply these first reactions by 2 to get this third reaction. So by adding these two second and third reactions, we can get the full ionic reactions. So you can see here, simplify the reactions by cutting these electron number, and here the 4H plus and 4OH minus form the water. So it will produce 2 mole of hydrogen gas and 1 mole of oxygen gas. The acidulated water can produce 2 mole of hydrogen gas as well as the 1 mole of oxygen gas by the electrolysis. So you can identify the test tube which have the hydrogen gas as well as the oxygen gas by the mole number. So in here you can see the one portion and this one have the 2 portions. So this B test tube have the hydrogen gas as well as the A test tube have the oxygen gas. Next, we are going to see about the industrial application of electrolysis. The first one is the extraction of the metals. So first, extracting sodium metal by electrolyzing the fused sodium chloride, which is already covered in our previous slide. And second one is the extracting aluminium metal from the bauxite. And second one is metal refining. So when copper is produced from the copper ores, the copper obtained first is input. So it is purified by an electrolytic process. The third one is the electroplating. The electroplating means the coating an object with a metal by electrolysis. So first one is the applying gold on silver jewelry or applying nickel or chromium on steel. We will discuss these things in the later videos. And the fourth one is the industrial production of the sodium hydroxide. So we already covered these things. You can remember this slide. In here, the hydrogen ions become as a hydrogen gas as well as the chloride ions become as the chlorine gas. So rest of the solution have the sodium ions and the hydroxide ions. So these ions are formed to produce the sodium hydroxide. Industrial production of sodium metal. So in here the electrolysis of fused sodium chloride, we can get the sodium atom or the sodium metal. You can see here the reactions happening at the negative electrodes. The positive ion is a sodium ion which receive the electrons and become as a sodium atom. So we can get the sodium metal from the, we can extract the sodium in the down cell. This is the picture of the down cell. We will deeply discuss it in the later videos. Let's discuss about the uses of sodium. The sodium is used in the sodium vapor lamps, as well as the sodium used as a coolant in the nuclear reactors, and sodium is required for some lab experiments. And then uses of chlorine. The chlorine is used to destroy the bacteria in the potable water, and this chlorine used as a bleaching agent to decolorize the paper, pulp or the cloth, and sodium is used to produce used in the production of chloric acid by reacting with the hydrogen gas, and it is used to produce the plastic like PVC. Thank you so much.